In the last few weeks, we've been looking at coronavirus and civil disobedience in the church. And while making those videos, there were 3 or 4 other things that I wanted to say, 3 or 4 other scraps, if you will, which I didn't include in those videos. I just thought it would take us off in too much of a tangent, and I thought it would make those videos a bit too long. So these are kind of offcuts, if you like, of those videos. I really want to start making a podcast actually, so we can just have informal chats about things like this. We need to figure out the best way to do that. But anyway, I just wanted to quickly make a video to get these offcuts, these scraps, if you will, out there, off of my mind, so that we can move on to the next thing. So let's do it. At the start of the coronavirus pandemic, I was talking about how it could be seen as a great opportunity for the church to be different from the world and to be seen as being different from the world, to be more visible and to show the world that Christians are simply not as afraid as everyone else is. Here's the gist of what I was saying in that video. And I think it's vitally important that during this crisis, Christians are found being one of these guys, that the world sees the best of us in this time. This time is actually an opportunity for the church that shouldn't be wasted. And that might sound like a weird thing to say, but as the world has suddenly got dark and afraid and has lost its sense of security, this is a chance for Christians to step up and be visible and to show just how different we are in this environment. After all this is over, we want the world to look back on this time and think, wow, didn't the Christians really step up back there? They were so generous and unafraid, and they helped out wherever they could, and they were fun and they were practical. When people look back on this time in years to come, let it be at the forefront of their memories. Let it be indelibly linked just how good and distinguishable the church was in this kind of situation. I went on to talk about the Roman plagues of 2,000 years ago and how when secular Romans were running away from the city and hiding out of sheer panic and fear of the disease, the Christians in those days marked themselves out as being very different from the rest of society by remaining visible and by remaining very unafraid of the whole thing. Now, just last week I was watching a news clip on YouTube of Douglas Murray. Now, Douglas Murray is a conservative, but he's not a Christian, and this was his outsider's view of how some church leaders had actually behaved during coronavirus.
This is a prelude to total collapse if this goes on. Total collapse.
And just lastly, is this all a symptom of the West having a fairly indulged existence for some time? Prosperity, peace, and very few coping skills, it seems, when real adversity comes along.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, at the beginning of the virus, I wrote some of that. I thought, it was in a way it would test our mettle as individuals as well as society. It sees what you can draw on in terms of reserves. I don't mean financial reserves. I mean moral reserves, cultural reserves. I think we've all been exceptionally bad at this. I mean, we live in societies where the church is asked to be closed. Asked to be closed. Imagine this in any previous time in history. In fact, in my own country, they didn't just ask to be closed, but the senior clergy just disappeared, as if they had no role. I think this, by the way, is a generational and a cultural mistake of epic proportion.
So just when society was thinking about the big questions, life and death, what comes next, maybe for the first time in their entire lives, maybe people were looking for places to draw strength from in this time, to see who had something different about them in this kind of situation. When they looked to the church, they should have seen that different people, that unafraid people. But at that very moment, many church leaders instead asked the government to close them down, to close their doors. And then they went into hiding, as though they had nothing to offer, no role in this situation. Now, I know not all Christian leaders have been like this. I know there are some who have truly stepped up this year. Fist bump to all you guys who have stepped up. I know you're out there. Come on, good work. But if you're one of those clergy who did ask the government to close you down, and if you're one of those leaders who did essentially go into hiding and disappear, then I think, to put it mildly, it's time to reflect on what Christian leadership actually looks like, because it doesn't look like that. And we're going to need some more backbone from Christian leaders in the years to come especially. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the government closed churches down this year because, in their words, churches were deemed non-essential. That's the phrase they used, non-essential. And if Christians thought, well, actually services might be non-essential, but we can still meet in homes, we can still fellowship and worship in house groups, we can eat together, we can gather, we can pray together, the government now made all of those options illegal too. Again, all of that was deemed non-essential. So the bottom line here is that there's been no legal route for Christians to worship or gather or fellowship in any way for large portions of this year, because the government deems the whole thing, the whole faith, as non-essential. Indeed, what's become clear is that the government sees practicing the Christian faith in any way as nothing more important than some kind of hobby, a disposable leisure activity, if you will, something akin to playing golf, and something less important than going to garden centres for some reason, but nothing more important than that. I mean, take a look at what non-essential actually means. Inconsequential, irrelevant, meaningless, negligible, trivial, unimportant, these kind of words. And when church leaders agreed with that assessment from the government, when the church leaders agreed to be shut down, they affirmed that belief. They said to the government, yeah, it's true. What we do is non-essential, it's immaterial, it's secondary, it's small, it's trifling. We don't have to do any of this. And I think even more, they conveyed that message to the church as well. In agreeing to be shut down, church leaders said to their congregations, you know what, we don't have to do any of this. We can hit pause on this for the best part of a year. It's unimportant, it's small, it's trivial, it's expendable. And I think many Christians, as a result, now feel a weakened desire for gathering at all. In fact, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this to see if I'm gauging this right, but it seems to me like Christians now are often thinking, actually, maybe I don't need to go back to church at all after this. I mean, I can worship or not worship, I can gather or not gather, I can sing or not sing. If we didn't need to do it for the best part of a year in 2020, then do we really need to do it at all? I get the feeling that's something that many Christians are now thinking. Now, of course, the Bible has quite a different view on this whole thing. The Bible tells us that practicing our faith should be as essential to us as the very air we breathe. The Bible says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Our faith is as important to us, as vital to our health and our well-being as the food we eat. It's more important than life itself. That's the message the Bible gives. And yet throughout 2020, in agreeing to lockdowns, the message Christian leaders have often conveyed to the churches, actually, we don't need to do this. We can live without it. It's fine. And that leads me on to the third and final point. Back in 2013, I think it was, I made a series called The Restless Church. And the thrust of that series is that what we call church today is not really what the New Testament portrays when you look at the book of Acts. At least it's a very incomplete version of what we see in the book of Acts. You know, sitting in services, sitting in straight lines, passively watching a service isn't really what we see the New Testament church doing in the book of Acts. In the New Testament, yes, the church was worshipping together in one place, it was being taught together in one place, and that would look similar to our services. But we also see the church meeting in homes, and we see them fellowshipping and eating together. They were discipling believers in a way that we just don't do anymore. They also went out into their local communities. They were visible, they were making a difference, and that wasn't optional. They didn't just go through the motions of weekly Sunday services, you know, sitting in straight lines and call that the full extent of church. And I think this moment should be a wake-up call, not to return to the pre-pandemic ways. I think this is a wake-up call to indeed remodel ourselves around the New Testament church as we actually find it in the book of Acts. Not only is the New Testament model more effective, but one day it may be the only option available to us, the way things are currently going. And also it's more persecution-proof, and that's important too. So let's say in the future the government comes down even harder on churches and tries to close buildings or issue heavier fines, whether that be for virus lockdowns or the pastor said something about homosexuality or transgenderism, whatever it is. Let's say the government comes down heavier on churches. Then one way to make sure the church keeps on going is to have a strong home church network or a life group network, whatever you want to call it. Because when that persecution comes to the church can just split and go into its pockets and keep on meeting secretly in homes. So I would also say to church leaders that now is not the time to go back to the old ways, but to rebuild around the New Testament model as we see it in the book of Acts, and in particular to create a strong house church network or a life group network and invest in people to make that a reality. So pick some people in your church that have the potential to be leaders and disciple them, so that if the church has to meet in homes, there will be solid leaders in all of those homes. I actually started the Fuel Network in 2013 with this aim. My plan was to put together an online discipleship program called Kindling for house churches, but unfortunately I didn't have the resources to put it together. But pastors, you can do this now. You can pick some people in your church that have the potential to be leaders, you can train them up so that if persecution comes and the government closes the doors on your building, the church can just go into its pocket cells and keep going in secret. So those were the three scraps. Number one, leaders, we expect you not to disappear when the going gets tough in future. Number two, the church is essential, no matter what anyone says. And number three, It's time to remodel the church around the New Testament in the book of Acts in particular, just because it's more effective, number one, and also in preparation for the days ahead.